Welcome back to another episode of StablePod, a podcast where we host conversations with the individuals who are shaping the future of decentralized systems. I'm your host, Juan. Today's guest is leading the charge and bridging the gap between TradFi and DeFi payment rails. Stefan George is the CTO and co-founder of Gnosis, a team building open applications and infrastructure for the new economy. In today's episode, we dive into everything from the importance of user experience, the launch and learnings from Gnosis Pay, and even touch on the DAO and its role in developing the Gnosis ecosystem. Gustav, would love to hear what you made of the conversation.
Yeah, I think talking with someone like Stefan, who is, probably one of the most experienced builders we have in the Ethereum ecosystem, predating the Ethereum launch with Gnosis, right? It's really interesting to hear with someone who comes with so much experience and has done so many different things, who has then now arrived at this, final place, which I think, is something that a lot of us want to achieve, which is, focusing on the more mass adoption and figuring out how can we actually, crack into the broader market outside of our little bubble. So yeah, a really great conversation with a very sharp builder, I think. Yeah,
they're definitely trying to crack the how do you make great crypto UX, and I think that's something that a lot of teams are trying to figure out. And I think, they're starting with Gnosis Pay, but I think they definitely have aspirations to become a neobank of sorts. So it'll be interesting. We definitely see a lot of appetite, at least from the people we talk to and our friends, in the space, that they want alternatives to traditional financial payment rails. Hopefully they're able to achieve that. And I think they're starting with Gnosis 3.0, their latest vision for what's next for Gnosis. And I think they're definitely in good hands, as you said, with Stefan and the team over there. They're builders, and they've been in the space a really long time. So yeah, excited to see kind of where they end up and how far they can get. And of course, we're active in Gnosis DAO. So we're definitely going to lend a hand in there and try to help improve and make, the ecosystem reach its goals. I think the conversation went really well. I hope you all enjoy our conversation with Stefan George. Welcome to the podcast, Stefan George.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Glad to have you. Stefan, before we dive into Gnosis, would love to first just highlight how long you've been actively building in the space for our listeners. Could you just give us a quick overview of your journey in the space?
For sure, yeah. So at this point, over a decade, we started 2013, building applications around Bitcoin. And then we came across the Ethereum white paper in 2014 and saw the opportunity to build much more decentralized applications with a business logic embedded in Ethereum itself. And we started working on Gnosis end of 2014, beginning 2015, as part of Consensus. At that time, as a competitor to Augur, so we focused on prediction markets at the time, always with the goal to become a spin-off from Consensus. In 2017, we did one of the first ICOs and raised a lot of Ether at the time, about 250,000 Ether. And we knew always the success of Gnosis will be very much dependent on the success of Ethereum itself. That's why we had a strategy to just keep basically most of the Ether, always stayed Ether long. And that allowed us to have a bankroll until today to develop everything that we developed in the last 10 years, basically. And among those things, we developed the Gnosis multisig, which we use for our own token sale, which turned into Gnosis Safe, which then turned into Safe as a spin-off. And we also had to build decentralized exchange infrastructure as part of prediction markets. You have to trade, right? And there was no trading infrastructure. So we built the first automated market makers, and then also tried to innovate to make those exchanges less prone to MEV. So we came up with other concepts of batch auctions, which ultimately resulted in the development of CowSwap, which also became a spin-off. And kind of that's what we did over the last 10 years. We also, of course, developed prediction markets. Unfortunately, I think that we were a little bit too early. I didn't find product market fit. But I'm also proud to say that the contracts we developed for our prediction markets are actually powering the number one prediction market today, Poly Market. So also those contracts, they came from Gnosis. And so, we can say that a lot of the infrastructure that's currently used by everyone doing something in crypto is actually sort of derived from what we did back in the day. Of course, we are still working extremely hard on the next big thing. And for this is building a decentralized payment network And yeah, for this, we build a lot of infrastructure right now. And yeah, but I think that's something we dive into. This is kind of the short recap of the last 10 years.
Yeah, I think that there's so much lessons and learnings and all of that you just described there for sure. Yeah, I think everyone is, of course, familiar with Gnosis. It's a name that's been around for super long time. Can you just clarify there because you guys came out with a blog post called Gnosis 3.0, like this manifesto or like this vision, basically outlining what you did before, which is prediction markets, and then you did something else, and then you did now what you're going to focus on, which we could touch on next. Could you just clarify there for the listener? What were the three main, the different pivots you guys had, and then kind of what you're focusing on next?
Sure, yeah. Of course, the mission of Gnosis started with building prediction markets. It turned out, again, like we were too early for this. So meanwhile, we developed a lot of infrastructure that should power prediction markets for wallets and exchanges. That kind of became then the main focus, because it turned out while prediction markets, no one really cared that much about. The other products we developed, the Safe, Wallet, and also CowSwap, those became actually very popular. So we decided to focus on those until they reached a point where it was better to actually have them separate. So I think it was a good decision to decide those companies become their own spin-off. Like we initially became a spin-off from Consensus. They raise their own capital, have their own token, and kind of live a life on their own, while still being, of course, strongly connected to the Gnosis ecosystem. And once this was completed, we decided to do an acquisition of XDAI, which turned into Gnosis Chain, with a roadmap strongly aligned with Ethereum. So we follow the same roadmap as Ethereum. We are having the same execution and consensus clients as Ethereum, which allows us to benefit from all the research that has been done for Ethereum, and also allows us to operate a very decentralized network. So we have about 200,000 nodes validating the Gnosis chain. So I would make the claim Gnosis chain is actually, after Bitcoin and Ethereum, the most decentralized network. Something that's very robust. It has been running without any downtime since its inception, and it's a very trustworthy infrastructure, which I think, especially for large-scale global applications, will be very relevant. And we're kind of also, of course, not only an infrastructure builder, but also a dApp builder. I think that is also a big differentiation point for Gnosis and other chains. We are not only building the network itself, but we also build the top applications on top of it. I call it a little bit like the Netflix originals strategy. Like we can build applications that no one else can build, and we can create a very strong ecosystem around them on our network. And that's kind of pivoting already into the Gnosis 3.0 agenda. What do we describe as Gnosis 3.0? If you look at Gnosis on a high level, we have, again, like Gnosis Chain kind of as a substrate underlying it. And then we have Gnosis DAO, which is governed by GNO token holders, which maintains the treasury and can allocate the treasury. And then we have Gnosis Ventures, or like Gnosis Studios, which effectively is incubating all the applications that should run on top of Gnosis Chain. And then we have Gnosis VC. And this is obviously to invest into the ecosystem, to enrich the ecosystem with all the applications that we cannot build ourselves. And are obviously also important to have a good user experience. And I think that's really where the strength from Gnosis comes from, that we have influence on all single layers of the stack. And we have expertise in building every single layer of the stack, which ultimately should allow us to have a better user experience than anywhere else. And that's kind of Gnosis 3.0. Of course, as part of Gnosis 3.0, again, like we're focusing on payments, and there's a few incubations that we're currently focused on. Which we'd love to dive into later. Just name two of them right now. One is Gnosis Pay. Some of you have already might try it, and the other is Circles, which is our version of a new decentralized currency that I'd also like to explain later on.
It's quite interesting, because I think we've also seen a lot of the DeFi protocols trying to become this super app, right? Curve launching their own stablecoin, Avalanche their own stablecoin, now Maker with the Sky rebrand, also launching their own a money market, and it seems kind of that a lot of the older players, they're kind of saying hey, these other teams, it's like what you said, right? These other teams are doing building these things, we can also take it, in-house. So like, we can kind of like offer it as like everything under like the same umbrella, and thereby like expand our ecosystem. What do you think is like some of like the advantages, of doing this as like a project founder, right? And do you see any like, maybe like, disadvantages for like the industry that like everyone is kind of like trying to do everything themselves? Because I think like, if you go back like 6 years, when 6-7 years when I started working, on like Ethereum projects, this was kind of like the complete opposite of what was being preached back then, right? Why do you think like we've come to this conclusion, and what are some of the advantages and disadvantages?
Yeah, it's a very good observation. So we see a lot of projects kind of complementing themselves with features that others have already developed. So either you don't have a money market, but a stablecoin, then you create a money market, or you already have the money market, but not the stablecoin, then you add the stablecoin. So we add a lot of kind of redundancy to the mix, and everything in the end becomes kind of similar with like small changes. Of course, I think the intention of all those projects is simply growth, right? Like you see, you have maxed out one product vertical, so you tap into the next one. I think in case of Aave, you kind of maxed out the money market, so you start working on a stablecoin, which in theory makes sense. However, I think I'm not sure if this strategy is necessarily the best, simply because if you replicate to something that has already, like someone else already succeeding with it, it's just very difficult to create the same network effects as the competitor. I think especially in the case of stablecoins, it's all about network effects, meaning distribution, where's liquidity, where coins traded. And this is very, very difficult to replicate. And I think that's also why like USDT and USDC have such an insane head start. It's very difficult to get to the same level. And I would also call DAI into this realm. Like DAI definitely also has a massive head start compared to everyone else. So I think you have to be very careful in terms of where you allocate resources to build a product that effectively is a competitor to already existing very successful products. And but I understand the motivation. For Gnosis, we do not really follow this principle, actually, I would say. So we are actually right now, we're not building a stablecoin, even though that's very attractive. I think that would mostly make sense if you already have the means to distribute. Then I think, yes, that would make sense. And I think we see like a lot of like TradFi players actually doing this now, like PayPal and so on. Like those companies have already kind of solved the distribution problem. For them, it makes more sense to go into this market. For Gnosis right now, we're not yet at this stage. I would not exclude that we would ever do this, but right now it's simply not what would make sense for us. So what we are focusing on is more, completely new technologies. I think Gnosis Pay is a good example, where we were the first to create a credit card that allows you to spend crypto that you have on chain. Now there's a lot of competitors who also try to imitate this product. But again, I think ultimately everything boils down to distribution. Do you have access to the customer? And I think that's kind of a change also in strategy. I think at the beginning, all crypto projects were mostly focused on solving certain technical or financial challenges with novel mechanisms. And there was a lot of advantage of being a first mover. And I include Gnosis there itself, right? Like Gnosis, we built the first like smart contract wallet. Great. That's why I think that's not the only reason why we succeeded, but it's definitely one of the reasons. And I think we saw the same also with other technologies. Now we're at the stage where we have already market saturation for many things. And just you cannot be early basically anymore. And so you have to be, I think your strategy has to be much more focused on how do you reach new users? How do you reach users that can ultimately use your product? And I think this switch is still something that slowly proliferates in our industry, like understanding, okay, how do we attract those new users? And of course, there other parties actually have more advantages than, let's say, the crypto OGs. Of course, PayPal has a massive user base. Coinbase already has a massive user base. And now it kind of falls back to us. How can we innovate to create something that's exciting enough to get new users onto crypto? And that's what we are focused on. Like, how do we build technology that's really interesting for new people to come in? And of course, right now, I would say the advantages are on our side, in the sense of technology, is at a point where we can build products that are on par or better than what users are used to today from, let's say, Web 2 TradFi applications. So we have all the means to create something great to distribute to a wide audience. And yeah, that's what we have to focus on right now. Building great usable products, making what we have built more accessible, and then find great ways to distribute.
Yeah, because in contrast to like, let's say like Aave and Makers as Sky, you guys are like more focused on like the consumer app side now, right? Like you don't want something that like they need to go in and, do like a bunch of like funky DeFi interactions. You want to give something that they can use straight in their hands, right? And you also mentioned your other product, is it called Circles?
Correct, Circles, yes.
Yeah, maybe you can explain a little bit about what that is then.
Yes, of course. So Circles is actually a product that's already out there for 4 years. We actually launched the first version, Circles 1.0, 4 years ago. And Circles is an interesting form of peer-to-peer money. Initially, we also associated specifically with in the context of universal basic income. The way Circles works is everyone can sign up for Circles, and on a periodic basis, new Circles are issued to you. The interesting thing, so it's a little bit like WorldCoin, right? In terms of like you join kind of the Circles network, and you get Circles tokens in return. The big difference, however, between WorldCoin and Circles is how we solve the identity and the Sybil attack problem. So in WorldCoin, everyone who knows WorldCoin knows how they do prevent Sybil attacks, and they do this by scanning your iris with this big sphere, then this data is kept somewhere. It's also clear there's basically a central index where this data is stored, and that's how you identify against the system and receive your WorldCoin in return. So there have been many, of course, there are many concerns about this, collecting all biometric data in one single data source. It's unclear what the real intention behind this is on a long-term perspective. So a lot of criticism there. Circles solves this problem very differently. Circles solves this through peer-to-peer trust. So in Circles, everyone has their own currency. So I have my Stefan Circles, you have your Gustav Circles, you have your Juan Circles. And the question is then, how do we make them fungible? We make them fungible by trusting each other, right? So I trust Gustav, meaning like I accept his Circles for my Circles, and I can trust Juan, and then I accept your Circles for my Circles. You have to trust me if you want to do it vice versa. And by doing this, we create this big network, trust network, that allows us to transact with each other. So for example, if I meet someone who I personally do not trust, but there's a trust connection between us, meaning, let's say, for example, Gustav is trusting this person, then I can just swap my tokens with Gustav's tokens and then use Gustav's tokens to pay this third party. And that is the idea behind Circles. And the exciting thing now is, so we mentioned that we launched this 4 years ago, and we had a rapid growth. The idea was you can join by creating trust connections with other people, and you were required to have 3 trust connections in order to actually be able to receive Circles. And so we had this kind of explosive growth. We call it like the big bang of Circles back in the days. The problem was, however, great, everyone has Circles, but what to do now, right? Like, what's the next step for Circles, right? And how do you create liquidity for this, and how do you actually make it usable in the real world? So Circles is great, but it's a problem of acceptance if you can actually have utility for this or not. In case of WorldCoin, what can you do with WorldCoin? Well, you can dump WorldCoin. you can get the WorldCoin from via the app. You can go to an exchange, sell it, but you cannot really do much else with it. I think they have some grants you can donate the money to, but yeah, it's still very limited in terms of what you can do with WorldCoin. What is our strategy with Circles? Right now, we want to launch Circles. We want to create again this big bang moment where people trust each other and create a massive network, massive trust network that also is actually in itself also an identity network, obviously. Like, it can actually be used for all kind of purposes, require identity. But then everyone has these Circles. And guess what? We've already solved the acceptance problem, because obviously Gnosis Pay is all about acceptance. You can pay with crypto everywhere where Visa is accepted. And now we just connect those two. We have circles being generated, and we will connect those two by just making those circles accepted via the card. So you get your tokens, you create a trust network, and you're able to spend those tokens as well. And there's one very important innovation compared to the Circles version 1 that we add now to Circles version 2, which is the concept of groups. So you can think of like if every one of us has their own circles, there's a big segregation of liquidity, right? Like you cannot create liquidity for every single circle. So what we do is we created the concept of groups, which allows to decide like which circles are actually fungible with what other circles. So for example, we can create a group, the StablePod or StableLab group, and we know each other, so we trust each other, and so we can say everyone can always exchange their own token for the StableLab circle, and then all of you can contribute some liquidity to this to actually make, like in an automated market maker, for example, provide liquidity against this group currency. And that's what we also will do for Gnosis Pay. We will have a Gnosis Pay group, and if you pass the let's say the rules to be eligible for Gnosis Pay, then you can exchange your circles for the Gnosis Pay circles, and that then allows you to actually spend them via the card. And I think that's a very powerful concept. Like back in the day in 2014, we were able to grow the user base to over 100,000 users in a very, very short period of time. Kind of had this explosive growth. And now I think we have all the means to recreate this big bang. But this time, there's actually a means to an end where there's actually utility for those tokens and actual acceptance. We hope that we'll find a lot of people as well that want to start their own groups. It can be really anything. It can be like, I don't know, gaming guilds. It can be, I don't know, someone who wants to create a network state. Whatever you think of, they all can create their own like equal currency and be able to add utility to it. And that is one way also how we want to solve distribution, because something that we realized with Gnosis Pay is Gnosis Pay is great. Gnosis Pay also had, let's say, the early mover advantage. We were the first to offer this specific type of product, but we're still limited to the crypto native users, right? We still are talking to the same user base. And even though we can add a lot of great incentives and make it more accessible and so on, it is still not easy to convert users. So it's still like, yes, you have to create something even better to make people switch. I think people say always like, if you want to make a user switch from system A to system B, there's of course effort on the user side. In our case, he would basically have to transfer his funds over, right, to actually be able to use this. And for this, the other system has to be 10 times better than previous system. And I think in payments, what we have seen also outside of crypto is only small incremental improvements, right? There has to be nothing like insanely better. I think Gnosis Pay is already like a bigger step, like make crypto much more accessible, but is it really the 10x that allows to just get everyone hooked? Probably also not. And that's why I think Circles is extremely important for the adoption phase and to create like a very interesting, novel product for users to be onboarded. And I think that is something where no matter what you think about WorldCoin, of course, we have our own view on it. No matter what you think about WorldCoin, they were able to onboard another over 6.6 million users to crypto. And there are very few projects that can say that. And that is something that is, I think, very encouraging and shows us there is a path if you create something novel to actually onboard those users. And that's something where we see our path to this user base.
I think also, I mean, it's really interesting, right? Because I think, if we look at like all the most successful projects, it's been about this like community-driven approach, right? Where you can like create these, like communities and like sub-communities. I think, for example, like the whole play to earn movement, I think is like a good example, right? Where like people felt like they were really like part of something that like benefited themselves, and that was why they were like, maybe apart from WorldCoin, but probably like one of the trends in the last couple of years is onboarded like the most like like normal people to crypto, maybe outside of meme coins. But I don't know if that's like a good onboarding or a bad onboarding. And I think also, kind of like creating these like social graphs between people, right? I mean, it also just sounds, if you are like in these groups and you can kind of like see what, the other people in the group are like spending and so on, it also just kind of creates this like, like a social interaction, which, I think finance, I mean, for most people around the world, finance is boring, right? You need to have kind of like some flavor added to it for them to be interested in doing it, right? And I think maybe there's also like the problem with like a lot of the DeFi protocols is like, I mean, inherently for us they're like the most exciting thing in the world, but for like most normal people, like they don't really care, right? Because people don't really want to deal with finances on like the daily basis.
I think you're really spot on there. Like for us this is very exciting, but for 99% of the population they really do not care at all, and this is not going to change. So we have to change in terms of what we're building and how we're promoting it. And I agree, like the social aspect is something I think we saw the infancy of this with like Lens protocol and others trying to innovate. I think POAP is also a very good example of this. I think POAP is one of the applications as well that has reached a lot of users. And that's very encouraging. And I think also the circles group concept is very universal. So it's like a very, like as a mechanism is very simple, but the way how you define rules of who can access it and the utility to provide for the token, of course, that's up to the user basically, or the group manager or whoever defines it. And there's, of course, like basically endless opportunities and possibilities how you can define this. And I think that's where we see a big strength, like a lot of local currencies. I think that's also something that we saw also whenever UBI, for example, was tested, even though I think UBI is kind of a subset right now of this. This was always like local currencies, a smaller community that has already a stronger trust among themselves. That then allows to have kind of its own local economy as well. And I think that's kind of the longer term vision, of course, like have like communities in all kind of parts of the world, can be somewhere in Indonesia, can be, I don't know, in Africa, wherever, starting to create their own local economies with their own currency, their own group currency, and expand from there. And make sure that basically the value capture is also within this local group.
Stefan, I want to double click on Gnosis Pay. I'm curious to learn more about the launch, how it's gone, the progress that's been made there, and kind of what have you learned from user feedback? You kind of mentioned it a little bit previously that you've heard that they definitely value UX and kind of like, that push over the line of like, this is so much better than TradFi. So I'm curious to hear kind of like how that launch has gone from your team's point of view, and kind of like what are some of the lessons and learnings from. I think it's been out how long now? Since February? It's been out a little bit of time now, right?
I'm always asking for time anymore, so I cannot even say
I
think, to be honest, I think there's this meme like, if you would have known how difficult it is, you would not have started it. I think here I can definitely say I understand much better now why no one else was previously able to do this. And this is simply because payments is inherently complex in terms of the parties involved to make it actually happen. You have the many different sides on every payment transaction, and you have to make sure that you integrate with all of them in order to actually offer a product to the end customer. And I have to say, we were lucky to be very trusted by Visa to work directly with them. Otherwise, I think it would have been pretty much impossible. And but nonetheless, I think if you see the complexity, not on the tech side, but purely on the regulatory side and the, let's say, partnership side, in terms of all the parties that you have to get involved for the acceptance, acquirers, and everything between the processor, that is a lot of work. And the technical part is almost the easiest in this case, at least for us. I think we were lucky to have a team that obviously had a lot of payment experience that we were able to convince to join us. I think otherwise it would have been impossible. And then I think also it's very important, or like what we're currently working on is trying to have less parties involved, basically, like reducing the complexity, because you can imagine every external party that is working with you has their own requirements and also their own compliance. And this all defines ultimately also how the user experience in the end is. And the more is under your own control, of course, the better the product ultimately can be, because you can basically do things at your own discretion. Like, just to give one simple example, right now we have the requirement to have a larger kind of security deposit in case money would not be accessible. Of course, we are living here in a world where things are self-custodial, and we know which guarantees we have, cryptographically guaranteed. But that's not enough, of course, for TradFi. So there's still like additional cost added on top of this, which don't really make sense from our point of view. But right now, they just are additional costs that we have to pay in order to even be able to operate. So I think it's still kind of a longer way to make sure it's as efficient as possible, but we're getting there. So this is kind of the view on the, let's say, non-tech side, on non-UX side, even though some of those things, again, like have implications on UX, especially in terms of compliance, as you can imagine. But then on the product side, also there, I think one lesson learned for us, for example, is if you're building a product that is, of course, much more retail focused, you also have to invest a lot more into support. It's something that's kind of obvious. But coming from crypto, where user base is pretty small, it's not as much on top of your head as it should be for something that is targeting a broader audience. I think we are we're still lucky. We're working with an early adopter user base, which is also kind of mindful of, okay, this is an early stage product. But it's very obvious also that's where we have to improve. We have to get really on par and also automate this process in a way that allows us to scale this business. I think that's a challenge for everyone who's stepping into this world, that now it's about scaling, right? It's about scaling the user base, which for most protocols right now in Web3 has never been much of a topic, because we're talking about relatively small amounts of users. And that's now quite different. Even though Gnosis Pay is still relatively small, so we have about 4,000 users, but they transact on a daily basis. And of course, there's so many possible pitfalls in payments, so many exceptions that we also only learn about while we're developing the product partially. So that, I think, has been quite a journey. But we're getting there. So I think the card right now you can use already in most use cases that you use your regular card with. And we're just adding more and more features. Very soon, finally, Apple Pay and Google Pay are coming. So that was a very much demanded feature, obviously, and will also obviously play into distribution a lot as we expand to other countries without having to ship the card everywhere physically. Even though it's cool to have a card, it's actually, I think, at this point for everyone more convenient to just use Apple Pay and Google Pay as it is today.
Stefan, as you stated, you're one of the unique projects to be pretty clearly B2C now. I'm curious, do you think, how do you get to that point where you're able to find what that 10x thing is for your application that users will be drawn to? How do you envision the team getting there? Is it through user feedback? Is it through just kind of experimenting, trial and error, different things? How do you kind of, I'm just trying to fill in the gap there of we know kind of where we want to get to. So what are these necessary steps that we as an industry and more specifically Gnosis can take to get you there?
Yeah, also a very good question. To be honest, I cannot give you a very clear answer. I wish I would have a very clear answer to that question already. But one thing is obvious. We are now at the stage where we can at least ask this question, right? Like previously, we had many excuses. Scalability is not solved, or user experience is terrible. At this point, there's really no excuse anymore. You can use great applications that have the same user experience as, I don't know, Revolut or N26. I encourage actually everyone to try out the Zeal wallet. Zeal is, I would say, the best user experience you can have with Gnosis Pay, which kind of comes to the point that Gnosis Pay is not necessarily a B2C business. We have our own interface, but it's also meant to be integrated by others like Zeal, and they actually do a great job in offering a great user experience. So in that sense, Pay is actually more like a B2B thing. And I would say our Circles approach, Circles with our own wallet, that is more the distribution side of Gnosis Pay. But yeah, I think the number one question is, Like, what are the features that draw people from something like Revolut or N26 or whatever you have to your decentralized wallet? And the only thing I know for sure is having self-custody is not going to be it. So obviously no user, like I think very few users understand this concept, and very few actually want to have this responsibility, which also brings then the question of like, how do you make sure people always have access and what are backup strategies? But putting all of this aside, assuming this is all solved, what is the one thing that actually makes it better? And I think there are a couple of different answers to this. Like a simple answer could be, we can make things more efficient, right? Like just to give an example of Zeal developed a great feature called Recharge. And what Recharge effectively allows you to do is to have your crypto working for you. Can be in any kind of DeFi protocol. Very simple example right now would be just holding it in SDAI. So you have a yield bearing on Gnosis chain up to like 7 or 8% yield bearing US dollar pegged token. And whenever the balance on your card drops below a certain threshold, then automatically some of this money is converted to actually be spendable on the card. So you kind of have a savings and checkings account in one. And then, of course, like I don't think there's any bank right now that would give you 7% on US dollars. It simply doesn't exist. That only right now in this form exists on crypto, specifically on Gnosis chain. And that is kind of one product, which is, I think, for most people still easy to understand why they could move. I'm not sure that they will. We basically have the product now. We will see if that's good enough. Hopefully it's good enough for many. But what I think is more likely is that we have to still innovate more on the product side. Like not just replicate what there is in Revolut, not just replicate what there is in N26 and so on, but rather add something completely novel to it. And I think their circles is a very good concept that allows to have a very novel idea that we can like kind of package in an overall offering later on that allows people to benefit on both sides and connect those two very tightly. But that's just one example. I think there are probably many others in terms of how you can build novel product ideas that benefit from blockchain that can be nicely integrated into an experience that allows to really like merge the world of like old TradFi and on-chain crypto, because that is something that I think becomes really imminent right now. We have this basically already ready. It's just a question like what is a bait for users to jump and join us.
Something unique about Gnosis Pay, there was recently a proposal in the DAO itself to basically approve this cashback program, right? I think that's obviously very interesting and pretty novel. You don't really see it, right? This kind of like program gets approved by the DAO, and then now it's integrated into this consumer-facing application. I just wanted to point that out, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts about like that type of initiative to help spur continued growth for this application.
Yeah, of course. I think here it was very clear. We saw like the user growth of Gnosis Pay, but we also saw that many users were not making it the default card, so did not pay everything with the card. And we wanted to create a very strong incentive for users to just use it for every transaction they want to do. And also go a little bit the extra mile of maybe a slightly worse user experience to get the maximum benefit. And I think that's something that is kind of, I would say, is in the DNA of DeFi degens. and that's why we knew like this program will actually have a significant impact. And we also made it in a way that you actually have to hold also GNO in order to get this cashback. So you have to invest into the project itself to also benefit from it. And I think that was a nice dynamic. So when we launched this, we saw hundreds of people buying some amount of GNO in order to benefit from this cashback program. And I think the reason also why it was successful here in Europe is because Europe doesn't really have any cashback programs. So there's basically nothing existent. We are probably the number one cashback program in Europe right now. And people love it. We have some people that continuously max out the spending limit that we have set. And so it has been going quite well. And of course, I think having this approved by the DAO is also great, because I feel everything that goes through this governance process also adds visibility to the GNO token holders, which of course also can benefit from the program itself, but also just spreading the word further and creating awareness that this program exists.
So, I mean, I think I think we all can agree that like DAOs in general has maybe been, one of the places where we've seen like the most inefficiencies, in an industry that is striving for efficiency. Like you guys are basically, like kind of like coming out with this, like front of the line, consumer facing product suite, but you have this, thing sitting in the background. Like, do you have any like concern of like the DAO basically all of a sudden coming in at one point and saying like, hey, guys, this is not what the GNO holders want anymore. Like, because also I think like another thing is that, I mean, if we look at, of course, like we can all agree that like Revolut, N26 is like amazing products, but their marketing spend is also insanely high, right? So it's like for you as like an organization to basically, try to compete with these kind of products, it would also require you guys to have a really high marketing spend. For example, in like referral fees, that they use a lot, right? I think, on Revolut right now, you get like 60 euros if you, refer like a friend, or, like cashback programs. So like, are you ever concerned that, at some point, you guys need to greatly increase the spend to be able to just try to catch some market share? And then you have this kind of like DAO sitting behind you that, inherently maybe can take that decision away from you.
That's also a very good question. So first of all, yes, if you look at the acquisition costs, can be insanely high for users. That's why we basically have to outsmart them, right? We have to create something that is better than this. And Circuit is basically one way for us to be smarter, to have something that hopefully will lead to a lot of growth without having to spend much marketing dollars. Like when we launched Circuits back in the day, $0 marketing growth, 100,000 users within 2 weeks. Hopefully we can recreate that. Otherwise, we have to think about other smart ways, but I'm quite optimistic about it. And then there's another very important point. Revolut is using a lot of, basically white label products in the background, right? They're not making much money on most of the services they are offering. And I already mentioned, like Gnosis, we have been developing a lot of different things, right? Like we're developing an exchange. We've developed like our version of SDAI is slightly different. And we basically have access to a lot of different products. Some of them are also owned by the DAO. And now we combine them in one offering. So the question, if you spend money on customer acquisitions, of course, like what return do you get from this acquisition? And is actually worthwhile? Because if it's worthwhile, then it's just about, okay, let's just grow and grow and grow as much as we can. And I think we have a good chance that because we have this offering that combines all kind of products, which are partially also owned by the DAO, it's much more likely we can make it worthwhile than anyone else. And I think that's why we're in a very good position for this. Of course, if we see that we are basically wasting money, then I think I would always appreciate the DAO to step in and say like, this is not working and we have to change it. Of course, our intention is also to not waste any money. But of course, I think if it's a kind of a Gnosis token holder decision to say, this is not working, well, then we have to look into how we are making this better. But again, like I think that would be a good feedback loop, actually.
That was going to be my next question there, which I think that's one of that's a good point there that you're making, which is basically a DAO. Like, why have a DAO at the center of not only Gnosis Pay, right? You're doing a bunch of other stuff at the same time. You're doing a lot of different verticals, different products, different projects you're exploring. Like, what was the benefit? What's the added benefit of that setup, of that model? Like, why have that DAO at the center, I guess, is kind of my question here. Like, what is unique about that you think is giving you that edge? We of course know kind of the drawbacks, but there is still some, unique positives there, right? So could you maybe expand a little bit more on that point?
Yes, of course. I think DAO is all about being part of something, right? It's not just, ideally, not just holding a token and hoping it will go up in value, but it's rather like participation and feeling of ownership. And I think that can be very powerful. And ideally, like everyone who is part of the DAO can also be an ambassador for Gnosis. And we see this a lot actually right now. We also have a Telegram group, for example, that complements our forum with GNO token holders. And I see a lot of people using the Gnosis Pay card. And all of them, I think the Gnosis Pay card is actually a very nice feature in the sense of everyone who's using the Gnosis Pay card has used very visibly, right? That's the benefit of actually having a physical card, because every time you use it, you have to pull it out and others can see it. And so basically everyone who's using this card most likely also has GNO tokens because of a cashback program, becomes also an ambassador for the product itself. So you spend, you get GNO in return. You already have GNO on this card. The GNO allows you to vote in the DAO. You are having ownership in what you're currently using while tapping this card. And I think this is a very good loop that also encourages people to participate. And that's why we see a lot of GNO token holders being very excited about the card and trying to give as much feedback as possible. So we also have a nice feedback loop directly with the people that are part of the DAO. And yeah, I think that has been actually going very well.
As the Gnosis ecosystem further develops, Stefan, and of course it's going to become more complex over time. It's already, arguably there's a lot of things, moving parts now. How do you ensure there's alignment? Is it just through the No token, the GNO token? Like, how do you make sure everyone, is still kind of feeding into the ecosystem, right? The value that it's producing, or the information that it's, it's still flowing back into this massive ecosystem. Like, how do you ensure there's alignment is my question.
That's a very good question. And there's also no simple answer to this. To some extent, it's still also a lot of kind of our responsibility, of course, to make sure that those things all fit together. Of course, we have a lot of people that work with us to make sure that there's alignment. We also try to set incentives that encourages alignment. That is something we're also currently experimenting and iterating on, like what is actually relevant for Gnosis DAO to be successful. And arguably for us, this is the users that we have, the number of users we have, but also users that are not just doing something, but rather contributing to revenue of the overall system. And so what we are setting is right now incentives which allow people or like organizations to benefit from accomplishing the same goal, right? Like the goal is having 1 million users or Gnosis chain, 1 million users that contribute to the revenue of Gnosis. And that's a very straightforward or relatively straightforward goal that now everyone has. And no matter where you work, that's what you have to work towards to in order to benefit from it. That's one way to try to do it. Of course, it's not that trivial. There's still like a lot of nuances, and you have to, basically talk to people and understand like what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, and try to make things as effective as possible.
Awesome. I do want to call out the time, guys. Just a final couple questions for you, Stefan. What can people look forward to from Gnosis over the next 6 to 12 months?
A lot of exciting things are happening. First of all, we will launch Circles 2.0. I will not say the launch date yet, but we are very, very close. And that's a very exciting release. This will also coincide with the major release of our own wallet, Metri, which we aim to make as user-friendly as, let's say, Revolut. And that should really allow everyone, all of your friends, your parents, whoever it is, to actually start using crypto. And then for Gnosis Pay, it's all about growth, like making it more accessible. Again, right now, Gnosis Pay is limited to Europe. And that's, of course, is only one small part of the world. So we're targeting especially the countries where we see there's a lot of demand, like Latin America, Southeast Asia, and other parts of the world. And thankfully, we have now a setup that allows us to expand rapidly without having to go through the entire pain of getting licenses everywhere and so on. And so, we will be able to grow quite rapidly. And make our product much more accessible. So a lot of people asking constantly for this product, and yes, finally we'll be able to ship.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Any final thoughts or parting words of wisdom, Gustav, from your end?
I think it's it's really interesting to talk to Stefan, because I think, like Gnosis, who arguably has been born out of, I think like one of the most difficult user experiences, the multi-sig wallet, to now come in and basically become, like a UX. I mean, I remember when I started out and I had to use it for the first time, a little bit complicated, but, it worked. And that was the most important thing back then. But now kind of like seeing, you guys like, doing this, I wouldn't necessarily call it like a pivot, but maybe, like changing your identity a bit into, really focusing on like the end users, I think is a super interesting journey. And I'm really excited to see how everything is planning out over the next 12 months. And Circle 2.0, it sounds like super fun and something which could potentially catch a couple of headlines. So yeah, really excited for this.
Oh yeah. And we're participating at Gnosis DAO. So StableLab is also eager participant in the ecosystem. So thank you so much for joining us today, Stefan. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure too. Good to see you.
Thank you, Gustav.
Thank you.
We'll see everyone on the next episode of StablePod.